Hello and welcome to the Sales Code Leadership Podcast with Kevin Teeler and my guest this week, Suzette Blakemore. Suzette, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you, Kevin?
Never better. The sun has returned to the UK. We had the most miserable summer over here, even by British standards. So as we record this, of course, now these things go out in a few weeks' time. So it's going to mean nothing to people, but they'll be able to look back on a week in September which has just been 25, 26 degrees. So I'm in my study. The light is pouring in on my face here, and sun's in the sky. I'm a happy bunny.
Good for you. Good for you. We had UK weather yesterday, so I can appreciate the sun.
Where are you? Where are you based in the US?
So I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Oh,
and we had 2 days of pouring rain for the last couple of days, and today the sun is out as well.
It sounds really unusual for that part of the world, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's usually not rainy like this early in the fall, except in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a little out of the ordinary, and we went to the lake to spend some time in the sun, so it was a little disappointing.
Oh, that is it. Well, anyway, you're back at work now, feeling, I'm sure, up for the challenge.
Sure.
So thank you for joining the call. The topic today is going to be project management for sales leaders and salespeople. We're going to cover three key areas: understanding stakeholders and key stakeholders and the difference between those, constraints that are put on a project and how they apply to our customer, and the critical path. So three key areas that are going to be really interesting. We haven't really covered this as a specific topic in the past, so I'm really excited about this, Suzette. But before we get on to the main topic, we'll warm up with a couple of opening rounds of questions. The first one being, what is it you get paid to do now?
I get paid to enable greatness in people and organizations everywhere. I work for Franklin Covey. That is our mission. And when I think about my role specifically, my role is to enable greatness in people that work for me. So I have about 14, 15 leaders and another 170 or so salespeople. And that's what I get to do on a daily basis. It's very mission-driven work. I love it.
I'm familiar, not everybody will be, with Stephen Covey, who wrote this, among other things, this best-selling wonderful book that I've got on my bookshelf in the corner of the room, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. Where does the Franklin come from?
So it actually refers back to Ben Franklin and time management.
Really?
And so, yes, okay. It's just a nod to that. But this was a merger of, you'll remember, the old Franklin planners.
Oh, yes.
And then the work of Dr. Covey around leadership. And so we've now formed a company that the most trusted leadership company in the world around leadership, time management, and all things in between to make you more effective at work.
Oh, these are great topics. I love this stuff. Absolutely love it. This is right up my street. And it will be, I think, for the listener to the Sales Code Leadership Podcast. So the next question then is, you're enabling greatness in the people that work with you today. Is that the role that you had in mind when you were 16?
No. When I was 16, I wanted to be Charles Kuralt. I wanted to be a broadcast journalist.
Okay.
So in the US, Charles Kuralt was a man who went on the road and he told these great stories, and he was on the news every night. And that's what I wanted to do. I realized when I went to college that I actually didn't want to tell the news at all. What I wanted to do was be a storyteller.
Right.
And so that's why I'm in sales today. Is when you're 16, you think you know what you want. And I met a customer once. I was a restaurant manager trying to put myself through university. And he said to me, you have what it takes to be a really great salesperson. You're likable, you communicate well, and you know how to solve problems. And I went home and I thought, well, maybe that is what I should do. So I started interviewing for sales jobs.
I love that formula. Likeable, know how to communicate, and know how to solve problems.
Yes.
Do you know what I'm often saying? And I think I guess you might probably agree with me, that we're not rocket scientists. it actually isn't that complicated. We can make it complicated if we really try hard in a bad way, but actually selling isn't that complicated. Those three things are a really good description of what good salespeople do these days. So what a great intro. So the chap you were describing, he was a TV newsreader, was he?
Yes, he was.
Right, like sort of Walter Cronkite type or something?
Yes, yep.
Right, okay. I'm just wondering why I don't know his name. I shall Google that after this call, because I'm quite a fan of American TV and stuff. I've been growing up in the 70s watching it. So yeah, okay.
You'll like him. You'll like the aspect of storytelling that he brought to it. So
I assume he's no longer with us.
he's not.
No, but you are, which is the main thing.
Well, at least for today, it's the main thing.
Exactly. At least for today. So this wasn't the career you had in mind at 16. And we've clearly established that. And you kind of described the path between those two. So why don't we jump straight into the meat of the topic today, which is project management for sales leaders, salespeople. We've touched on those three things. Maybe we should go through those in a little bit more detail. The first one, I think you said, was understanding the difference, was it, between stakeholders and key stakeholders? Are we talking in reference to, let's say, a big opportunity, maybe, I don't know, a $100,000, $200,000 sale? Would that be a good example?
Yes. And let me just say, so that your listeners aren't stressed out about the topic of having to learn project management on this call today. I am not a certified project manager. I've written a book on project management, but very much from the perspective of being a practitioner. And that came to me mostly when I was in my sales enablement days. So I, like many good salespeople, had a lot of people come to me over the course of the years and say, can you teach others how to do this? And so I did a stint in enablement. And during that time, realized all I was doing was managing projects. When I got back into the sales world and started to sell again, I realized some of the things I had learned in managing projects were really applicable to what I was doing in the sales world. And it's because I had a mindset shift. And the shift was, prior to this, I would always think about my job was to get a sell completed, right? Start the prospect, find the prospect, start the conversation, complete the sell. What I wasn't thinking about was that for my customer, everything they were doing was a project implementation. And so the moment I started thinking about it from their point of view, instead of from mine, it changed the conversation. And I started thinking about, how does project management now apply to sales so that I'm much more in tune with what's going on in my customer's world? So when you think about stakeholders and key stakeholders, really doesn't matter what the size of the project is, but there is a difference. And I think a lot of times we don't think about them. So the stakeholder is anyone who's actively involved in the project, or anybody who's positively or negatively impacted by the project.
Oh, okay. Let me pick up on that one. So there's a subtle nuance there. Because I think we generally think stakeholders are only those who are positively impacted, don't we? We tend to think they're kind of like the supporters, if you like. But actually, of course, that's not true, as you say. You've got to think about the people that are negatively impacted as much as that.
Correct. And if you think about, for most of us who are in some sort of SaaS world, the end user is impacted every single time, right? Mm-hmm. So the end user is either going to have a positive experience based on what you just sold this organization, or they're going to have to suffer through a lot of change management.
Yeah.
And at the very least, they'll suffer through the change management of it and come out the other end positively impacted, or it will be a negative impact.
Mm-hmm.
And so understanding and asking questions about the stakeholders is key to us being able to help the customer actually not only get a good result, but the buyer to get buy-in. Let me just tell you the difference between stakeholders and key stakeholders. So a key stakeholder is the person who determines the success or the failure of the project. What I often found when I was selling, and I find this still today when I'm working with my leaders and salespeople, is we mistake the decision maker as either a stakeholder or a key stakeholder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And often, of course, they're in that category, but a key stakeholder is usually a level or two above the decision maker. And a stakeholder is usually a level or two below or adjacent to the decision maker. And because we're only focused on the decision maker, we're not thinking about those other sets of people.
Yeah. I'm gonna chuck an example out. Actually, my daughter, I've got two daughters. One of them lives near us in Bristol in the southwest of England. Beautiful city, lovely place. You should come and visit sometime. If you're ever in England, well, I'm sure you are in England on a regular basis, let me know. You travel down. She's moving. Her and her boyfriend are moving. And we've been looking at flats with them. So I guess in this context, there are two key stakeholders, maybe my daughter and her boyfriend. But also, I'm chucking a bit of money into this venture with my wife as well, because it's bank of mum and dad. So we're stakeholders to a degree as well, aren't we?
You are.
Yeah. And then there's the people, they're going to have to get a mortgage. So there's the people going to get a mortgage. Then, of course, there's the people they're buying from. Now, see, this is the other point, isn't it? I don't know whether this is the right point to throw into the pot that we know in the SaaS-based world, perhaps much like a housing transaction, there are multiple people in the decision-making unit now, aren't there?
Well, and I'm sure others out there who are listening feel this today, but we're finding that decision-making room is getting bigger and bigger, right?
Yeah.
Where a few years ago, you might be able to get away with talking to one or two or three people. Today, it is not uncommon to have 5 people, 7 people, sometimes 10 people who are all part of that decision-making process.
Yeah.
And so really understanding how those people are measuring this decision is going to be a key to salespeople being able to work through it more quickly.
Yes, absolutely. And so how do we determine the difference? Could we just drill into that a little bit more between a key stakeholder and a stakeholder?
Yeah, I think there are 2 questions that we can ask that are helpful. I often hear salespeople say, who else should be in the room, right? And it's not that it's a bad question. It's just not getting to the heart of how somebody would answer it. And so there are 2 ways to ask the question I think are very helpful. Who's going to be positively or negatively impacted by this project or implementation? And really stop and let them brainstorm all the way down, encourage them to brainstorm all the way down to the user level. And then the other one is, who is going to ultimately decide if this project was a success or a failure? When you ask those 2 questions, now you're getting to the heart of who the stakeholders are on one side, who the key stakeholder is on the other side. And now you can say, should those people be part of this conversation?
Yes.
Whether they're in the room or whether we go out and interview them separately, we believe and have found that you'll be far more successful if we include those people as part of this conversation.
Yeah.
You can see how that's such a better question or set of questions than who else should be in the room.
Yeah, who else should be in the room is what I would call, I don't know if you have double glazing in America. I don't know if you...
I don't know that.
Okay, I'll introduce you to the concept of double glazing. I think it's certainly very popular in Britain, probably still is. Older houses not built all that well, big leaky windows, lots of draft. So you put secondary double glazing on. This was a big selling item here in the sort of 70s, 80s and 90s, and probably still is. And it was probably the 3rd biggest capital expense you would have as a householder. So the first is you buy the house. The second is you buy a car. The third is this is going to cost you a lot of money to retrofit these windows. So they had a pretty hard sales team going around. And of course, you're dealing with families, parents, husband and wife decisions. So you wanted to make sure the question was always, have we got everybody in the room, or do I come back this evening when your husband's home? Right. I'm not saying that, this is 70s talk, right?
Yes.
Making no judgments about people's relationships these days. Yeah, so I get that. So what you've got is something rather more sophisticated than that. And also, you're not trying to manipulate people. You're trying to help them.
Correct. This isn't about this. And I think one of the biggest things that I've learned being a sales leader is my job is to help my salespeople get out of their own heads.
Right.
I think where a lot of sales leaders make a mistake is they think my job is to get someone out of their own head and into my head because I'm the leader. Right?
I've never heard of it explained that way. I do like that. That is good. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's such a bad, but it's actually a bad premise because
yes,
I'm a salesperson too. Chances are my head's not necessarily right either. So I need to get people out of their head and into the customer's head. Ooh. When I can do that, right? When I can help them do that, now what we're actually into, it goes back to that guy who told me years ago, I'd be good. We're actually into problem solving. We're actually into understanding what it is they're trying to accomplish, what the barriers or the constraints are going to be, and then we're helping them figure out how they'll overcome them. And at that point, you know, we all talk about being a partner or a trusted advisor. You can't work your way into that. You have to earn your way into that. And the only way you earn your way in is to put yourself in their shoes.
Absolutely. Do you know, I think that's such a good point. You know, I'm a big fan. I'm often talking about this Clifton Strengths Assessment.
I love it.
You love it. I know you do, because learning and development professionals and love it, and sales leaders generally like it a lot as well. And they measure this capability, which is called empathy, right? It's the ability to sense, their definition, the ability to sense the emotional temperature in the room, which is really to look at things from other people's eyes. Now, frankly, it's really rare that people, particularly salespeople, have that anywhere they can use it. No big surprise there, perhaps. But empathy is also a skill that you can develop, right? Because when I tell people, according to Gallup, I don't really have any, a lot of people find it quite hard to believe. I mean, if you ask my wife, she wouldn't find it hard to believe. She doesn't. But the truth is, you can develop this as a skill, right? I mean, it requires you to subjugate your immediate needs to those of other people and say, let me understand what's going on in your world.
100%. And I think the fastest way to develop it is just to say, let me step out of my own perspective and into yours.
Yep.
I don't have to, that doesn't mean I have to let mine go. It doesn't mean mine is wrong, but I do need to step out of mine and into yours and understand why you think the way you do, how you're facing the things you face. And when I'm able to do that, now we can have a different type of conversation. This isn't smoke and mirrors. This is, hey, let me really understand what it is you might be up against, because I want you to be successful. If we're not going to do, and I say this to people all the time, I have a good friend and colleague, Randy Illig, wrote a great sales book from many, many years ago called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play.
I've read it. Great. It is a great book. I tried to get him on my podcast. I think he's retired.
Well, he's semi-retired and very busy. It is semi-retired.
But that combination is a dynamite combo. Good for him.
Yeah, but I love just the concept of that, right? Let's get real or let's not play. Let's make sure we really understand what we're up against here, or we're just going through the motions and we might get lucky, but a lot of times we won't.
Yep.
And so I just think thinking about stakeholders, asking these questions, and then the next place we can go is understanding their constraints can really help you build that empathetic muscle that turns you into a trusted leader, trusted advisor.
Yes.
In the sales world.
It does. It absolutely does. It's why actually experts in their field can be very good salespeople, at least in the initial phases of a company. I mean, with that founder-led sale, they usually come from a place of having understood the problem because they experienced it and try to overcome it themselves. Now, it leads you to all kinds of different problems when you're trying to scale a sales team, but that's probably for a different call. So the next one then, should we drill into that, which is the constraints part of it? Could you explain that to us and how that works?
Yeah, so in project management, there's a premise that every project will face constraints. There's no way around it. right? And think about, there's all kinds of constraints. We won't go into all of the crazy nuances of constraints today, but think about the ones we all know about. There's going to be time constraints, budget constraints, people constraints. You have to think about what is the risk to the employees who are going to be part of this implementation, and what is the potential risk to the customer. So you got to think with a risk mindset. Scope is another one. I love the idea of scope, because the idea of scope creep is how we usually hear it, right? I pull one thread, and because I pull one thread, the whole thing starts to fall apart. My husband and I are in the middle of a remodel project.
On your
We're
house?
both in our house. And every day we're looking at each other going, what in the world, right?
It looks pretty tidy to me, Suzette. I can see the room behind you.
Well, but I'm not even going to say anything there.
Technology is a wonderful thing.
It is a wonderful thing. But you know what happens? We're going to refinish our floors, and now the staircase doesn't match. And now, because we got to take the carpet off the staircase, now we got to have new carpet. Well, guess what? The exact same thing are happening to our customers. Yes. And the more we can help them know, these are the constraints we often see when we do this type of work with other customers. And these are the things that we do to help you combat them or mitigate them. Yeah. Now, not only am I a good partner, but that's where I become the trusted advisor. Because now, instead of them saying, I know what I'm going to do, I just need you to sell me something for a good price, they're coming to you and saying, can you help me think this through? Can you help me make sure I get success? Can you help me make sure I avoid some of the constraints that you've already told me I'm going to face? That's a big deal when a salesperson can step into that role, because the competition's not doing it.
No, absolutely not. I mean, this is a consulting type sale to a degree, I suppose, isn't it? And
it is.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, famously, few people in companies now actually even call themselves salespeople. I think the title sales has become, I'm not sure what, I think selling is a more respected sort of profession in America than it is in Britain, but over here it's just not. And people don't want to talk to salespeople. They don't want to talk to salespeople because generally there's perception they're going to be manipulated into buying something they didn't want and can't afford.
It's so true. I mean, we call our salespeople client partners for a reason.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I like that. That's nice, actually. I like that. I'm just jotting that down. I am taking a ton away from this. Trust me. Yeah. Well, I think it's good. It's a good title as long as it's genuine, and I'm sure in your case it is, because the way you sell backs that up, doesn't it? Right. I mean, selling is not a thing that is some sort of magic trick that we do to people, and before they realize it, they bought something they didn't want. It's very much a joint enterprise, isn't it?
It should be. And by the way, for a decision maker, remember, it's got to be a joint enterprise on their part. I'll give you a quick story. I was talking to a salesperson probably a couple of months ago, and I said, how does it affect the stakeholders? And his answer was, well, the decision maker said it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Right? The decision maker said, I get to make the decision.
Yeah. To hell with them.
To hell with them, right?
Yes.
And I just said, okay, that's a yellow light, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I said, how does the key stakeholder feel about how they're going to measure the success of this project? And he said, it doesn't matter, right? I'm talking to the decision maker. It doesn't matter. The key stakeholder is just going to see that it went really, really well. And I said, this yellow light, right?
Yeah,
These are things that are going to throw this deal into chaos, and you're not going to get it done unless you go back and have a let's get real, let's not play conversation. Well, sure enough, 2 months later, we didn't get the deal.
Yep.
Right. And it's because we're not in a world that's unilateral anymore. We can't sell unilaterally, right? People can't decide unilaterally. We've got to be saying, hey, let's look at this as a big cohesive environment, and let's be really thoughtful about how everyone is involved and affected here. And I do think it makes a difference. And it isn't smoke and mirrors, it's just better questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Better questions, a more thoughtful approach to how you conduct yourself. Sometimes slow down to speed up.
Yes, absolutely. And when I used to teach a lot of project management, the number one thing I would hear from people was, I don't have the time to go figure out what all those stakeholders think. And I found myself saying this often: you will spend the time somewhere. So if you're under the misbelief that you will save time by not doing this, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. People are like that though. People do that.
They are, right?
Yeah,
you're
absolutely.
You're just wrong, because you're going to spend the time somewhere. You're either going to spend it on the front end, getting very clear and talking about the things that matter up front, or you're going to spend it somewhere in the middle solving all the problems that came up because you didn't talk about it up front. You will not save the time. So you just have to decide where you want to spend it.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing, of course, in the world of recurring sales now, you might even be able to bulldoze a sale through with the help of the person that signs it off. But if you really upset the other stakeholders along the way, they'll make sure that project fails, and you won't get a renewal year 2 anyway. So, right? I mean, it's all very short term, isn't it? We better dip into the last one of the triumvirate, the critical path. Talk to us about that. That sounds like some kind of religious experience.
Actually, I love the critical path.
Yeah.
And it does sound very scary, doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
But here's the thing. A critical path is just the series of events that have to happen in order for the project to come to a successful completion.
Yep.
Okay. I put the word successful in because I don't want to do projects that fail. And I'll just give you an example of how a salesperson might use a critical path. We do this all the time with customers to just help them understand what it's going to take. And it is, let's back up all the way to the very end. When we're measuring success, when does that have to happen? And what will be the success criteria? So I'm going to just, I'll tell you about a brief conversation I had with a customer about a month ago. I asked the question, talk to me about what it is you're trying to achieve. And he said, well, he gave me the success criteria. And I said, when will you know it's been achieved? And he said, well, May of 2025, I'd like to be able, and it took a little prodding, right? I'd like to be able to give a full year of results. I will know it's been achieved when we've done it for a full year successfully. Okay, great. So we know then that we've got to have an implementation by May of 2024, because you need a full year, right? We know the implementation is going to take 6 months to complete. So we know that has to be done by November, but consider the holidays. That means we really need to start the implementation by October, right? And we're in August. Yeah. So what do we have to do between now and October 1st to make sure this thing actually gets decided upon and contracted? Right. And the customer was like, oh my gosh, I am not thinking that way at all. Yeah. Right. So we wrote it out in a critical path, put all the dates in place, and now we're working through what do we have to be doing in the next 4 weeks to get this thing to a place where we can actually start the implementation. That little trick of understanding critical path will help you increase your deal velocity, because you'll be selling and closing more quickly because you're actually working to the very end result. Yep. Most of us just work on the part I'm working on now, and it just keeps floating out.
Love that. That was sweet. Three easy things to do. We could do all of this in a heartbeat and accelerate your sales dramatically. Of course, it's not like that in real life, is it? We know that. I mean, because things happen, don't they? Right. But if you have but actually having a process, because selling is a process as well as a skill, is a science and an art. It's people and systems effectively. I think that made a lot of sense. Thank you, Suzette. Really straightforward. We'll take some notes from you and write that up with the speaker notes that go out with this pod in a few weeks' time. But before we leave you, I wanted to dive a bit more into a couple of topics just to close out the conversation and get a better understanding of your world, really. If I'm right, I think you said, how many direct reports do you have in your role?
Well, so I have 16 leaders under me in one form or fashion.
Right.
Then about 170 client partners.
Which is a lot. I mean, that's quite a big team. That's pretty sizable, isn't it? I'm interested to know what you do to unwind at the end of a busy day, because it sounds like you're busy.
Well, I'd like to say I've figured this one out, Kevin, but I'm still working on it. I love to walk. I love to hike. I recently got into stained glass, so I'm learning how to do stained glass windows. The thing I love about stained glass that the other two things don't do for me is I have to think about the glass. I cannot think about work. I have to think about the glass, or it breaks on me, it cuts me, it does all these things. And there's something really lovely about getting your brain out of the game.
Oh, yeah. Get your brain out of the game. Wow. Yes, I think there's a kind of a link with that and mindfulness, which is very popular now. It's being in the moment, actually doing stuff that you have to really focus on. It's a great thing to do. And no one's ever come up with stained glass before. That's another first for the Sales Code Leadership podcast. So the last question, this is the one that trips people up. Are you ready for this?
Okay, I'm going to try not to get tricked.
I got this from the old TV detective Columbo that probably a lot of the listeners to this show have never heard of, but he was the greatest TV detective of all time and a big hero in my house, because Columbo was the only TV program that my father, American TV program, I should say. He didn't have anything against the Americans, just didn't like the TV programs. So he watched nothing American. All I did was watch American TV programs as a kid. Didn't really do anything else. So we both loved Columbo. And Columbo always had one last question, which was always the one that would trip the suspect up as he left the room. So the last question is, what's the one thing you wish you knew at the beginning of your career that you picked up along the way?
As it pertains to leadership, when I was a young leader, and maybe this is a rite of passage and I shouldn't flog myself for it, but when I was a young leader, I really believed that it was because I was smart or effective or right. I believed it was, honestly, and I hate to say this in a terrible way, it was all about me, right? And I have learned now in my mid-50s, it's not about me at all. It has nothing to do with me, right? And everything to do with my ability to see greatness in someone else, clear the path for someone else, help them to realize something about themselves they didn't know was within them. That's when I feel like I crossed over to being a good leader. I don't believe I'm a great leader yet. I think that is a lifetime, right? But I'm a better leader today because I have stopped thinking that I earned the right to have power. And I started realizing that my power is my responsibility.
Wow. Okay. Could you just repeat that last? So you stopped believing you had the right to have power, and now you realize that having power is it's your responsibility to exercise it in the service of others.
Yeah, my power, my superpower is that I am responsible, and I love the word, in the service to others, right? That really a great leader harnesses the collaboration, the innovation, the collective lightning of their team. That's what a great leader does. A great leader doesn't come in and have all the ideas and tell all the ways to do it. They just harness what's already in those people and spark something. And it took me many years to understand I was the spark to flames that already exist inside of others.
Oh, I love that. That's really, really beautiful metaphor. Suzette, thank you. It's been a lovely conversation.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've had a great time.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's flown by. I'd also like to thank the listener. Please keep on tuning in. And if you like what you hear, leave us a review. It helps enormously with the ratings.